Good morning, afternoon, or evening, cats and dogs. Today's video will focus on the lesson 6.4 guided notes on writing and solving two-step equations. We've already done one-step equations by adding and subtracting and by multiplying and dividing. So as I said earlier, we're going to combine the two into one question or one problem. So let's go ahead and get started. In our first problem that's already done for us, the equation is 5t plus 2 equals 7. So you can see this equation involves both multiplication and addition. We're going to continue to use inverse operations to solve our equation. So we're going to identify the two things that are happening to the variable. Unlike before, when we only had one thing happening to the variable, here we have two. So start with the variable itself, which is t. And the first thing that's happening to the variable is we're multiplying it by 5. So I make sure to list that first. After we multiply it by 5, we're adding by 2. The inverse of multiplying by 5 is to divide by 5. And the inverse of adding by 2 is either to subtract by 2 or add by -2. Now remember, for adding and subtracting, we have two possible inverses. We can change either the operation or the sign. So if you were thinking subtract by 2, you're correct as well. When we go to solve this, though, we're going to work in reverse order. So the last thing that we did to the variable is the first thing that we undo. So I usually like to draw an arrow from the bottom to the top because I'll actually start by adding by -2 to both sides. So I'm going to highlight that in green. That's the first thing that I'm going to do. So I'm going to add -2 to both sides. Notice how I line up the add -2 underneath the other two, and I line up the plus -2 underneath the 7 on the right-hand side. So the first thing that I'm going to plug into my calculators here, and I know this is going to be hard to box in, but this 7 plus -2. So I'm still going to have this 5t left. The 2's are going to cancel out. That's what I want to undo. But I have 5t, not just t, equals, and then 7 plus -2 is 5. And then I do my second inverse operation. Remember, I work bottom to top. That's going to be to divide by 5. So I'm going to divide both sides by 5 here. This is going to leave me with 1t, or just t, and I'm going to plug into my calculator or do this mentally. 5 divided by 5. Let me slide that over a bit so we can see our division symbol. So we do 5 divided by 5, and our solution is 1. Now, we can still check these solutions like we could our one-step equation. So our solution is 1. So grab your calculator, do 5 times 1 plus 2. Your calculator should give you 7. As long as it does, it means your solution is correct. All right, let's take a look at number 2, where we have to do some of the work ourselves. So we've got 6u minus 8 equals 28. The first thing that's happening to the variable u is we're multiplying it by 6. Then we're subtracting 8. The inverse of multiplying by 6 is to divide by 6. The inverse of subtracting by 8 is to divide by 8. But keep in mind, we want to work in reverse order. So the first thing that I'm going to do here is I'm going to add 8 to both sides. So let's add 8. Generally, you're going to be doing adding or subtracting first, then multiplying or dividing, which is like reverse order of operations. Mr. Underkoffler likes to teach it as SADMEP instead of PEMDAS. But again, you're just going to work in reverse order. So let's add 8 to both sides. You're going to plug into your calculators 28 plus 8. Don't forget, you're still left with 6u on the left-hand side equals 28 plus 8 equals 36. Notice how after our first step, we just end up being left with a one-step equation. So that should be pretty easy. The inverse of multiplying by 6 is to divide by 6. So let's go ahead and divide 6 on both sides. And we're going to be doing, I probably shouldn't have uncovered the answer yet, but we're going to do 36 divided by 6 to get u equals 6. Don't forget, you can check your solutions. Grab your calculator. Do 6 times 6 minus 8. Make sure your calculator gives you 28. It will. All right, let's try more, because with this solving equation stuff, practice is so important. So in number 3, we've got 21 equals 42 plus 7k. The first thing that's happening to the variable, since the variable is right here, is we're multiplying it by 7. Now I know the 42 comes first, but you are multiplying by 7 as your first step. And the inverse of that is to divide by 7. Then you're adding 42, and the inverse is to subtract by 42. So remember that we're going to work in reverse order. So we're going to begin by subtracting by 42 on both sides. So let's subtract 42. We're going to show that once on the left and once on the right. 21 minus 42 is what we're plugging into our calculators. I'm going to stop making the boxes here so it doesn't get too confusing, but 21 minus 42 is negative 21 equals 7k. Now we need to divide by 7 on both sides since that's the inverse of multiplying by 7. So in your calculators, you're going to do negative 21 divided by 7. You should get negative 3 equals k for your solution. All right, moving along, let's take a look at number 4. This one is our first one that involves division. 18 equals g over 3 plus 6. The first thing that's happening to our variable g is we're dividing by 3. And the inverse is to multiply by 3. After we divide g by 3, we add 6. And the inverse is to subtract by 6. So remember to work in reverse order. Start by subtracting by 6 on both sides. So let's show that. 18 minus 6 gets us 12. Set that equal to the g over 3. This will cancel out here. So we have 12 equals g over 3. The inverse of dividing by 3 is to multiply by 3. So let's show that on both sides. We're going to do 12 times 3 to get our solution, and that will be 36. Again, it should become pretty standard in routine as you're starting to work through these problems. It will take some time to get used to being able to do the two-step equations, but I think it will become pretty easy with some practice. All right, let's keep moving. We're only doing through number 11 in this video because I don't want to throw too much at you at once, and I want to make sure we have a chance to do some independent practice as well. So in question number 5, there's two things happening to the variable. First, we are multiplying x by 2, and the inverse of that is to divide by 2. After we multiply by 2, we are adding negative 7, and the inverse is to add by positive 7. So let's work in reverse order here. So that means we're going to start by adding by 7 on both sides. So let's show that. Add by 7 on the left and right. That's going to leave us with 2x equals 16. And then we are going to divide by 2 on both sides, which is the inverse of multiply by 2. Final solution, do 16 divided by 2. We get 8. Don't forget, you can check your solution. Negative 7 plus 2 times 8, hit equals. Make sure your calculator gives you 9. All right, number 6 and 7. So number 6, the first thing that's happening to A is we are dividing by 4. And the inverse is to multiply by 4. After we divide by 4, we're adding by 13. I know it's written backwards, but keep in mind you start with the variable and work your way out. So we're dividing by 4, then adding by 13. The inverse of adding by 13 is to subtract by 13. So work in reverse order here. We're going to start by subtracting by 13 on both sides. So let's do that. Now be careful with this. You're plugging into your calculator. I am going to box this in. Negative 3 minus 13. That should get you a over 4 equals negative 16. And then we are going to multiply both sides by 4. So let's show that. Multiply by 4 on the left and the right. Do negative 16 times 4, and we will get a equals negative 64 for our solution. Now, if you would choose to check this one, don't put it in as a fraction. Write or type in 13 plus negative 64 divided by 4, hit equals. A lot of times the calculators will not allow you to put negatives in a fraction. Some calculators will give you an error message. So I just wanted to caution you about that. I know I mentioned it in class, but we'll mention it again. All right, number 7, we've got negative 3 plus c over 2 equals 12. What's happening to the variable first is that we are dividing by 2. The inverse is to multiply by 2. And then we are adding negative 3, and the inverse is to add by positive 3. So let's work in reverse order here. We're going to start by adding by 3 on both sides. So let's add 3 on both sides. It's going to cancel out on the left. On the right-hand side, you're going to be left with 15. So we have c over 2 equals 15. Now we are going to multiply by 2 on both sides. So show multiplying by 2 on both sides. You should end up getting c equals 30 for your solution. All right. I did put some independent practice within this video. I think it's a good idea for us to see. So why don't you pause the video, someplace where you have some space, give these 2 questions a try. All right, hopefully you were able to at least get these started. I realize that solving two-step equations, it's new and it's going to require some practice. Number one, the first thing that we're doing to x is we're multiplying by 5, and then we add 6. So let's undo adding by 6 first, which means we should subtract 6 from both sides. That's going to leave us with 5x equals, keep in mind that's a negative 29 minus 6, so that'll get us negative 35. Undo multiplying by 5 means we need to divide by 5. Final solution should be x equals negative 7. So I hope you got that, but I also realize that as a new concept, you may still be struggling with this a bit. I expect you to be maybe, around the 40-50% feeling pretty good about this. If you're a little bit higher, that's good. We hope to get closer to that 70 to 80% level here soon. Number two, we have negative 6 equals x over 15 minus 9. The first thing we need to undo is subtracting by 9. So let's add 9 to both sides. Negative 6 plus 9 is 3. We have 3 equals x over 15. The inverse of dividing by 15 is to multiply by 15. And we will get, let's try to move that over. We will get x equals 45, or 45 equals x. All right, I want to finish up with one last type of problem, which is these ones where we're subtracting the variable. The variable comes after subtraction. Anytime your variable, and listen carefully to this, anytime your variable comes after subtraction, I'm going to ask that you add the opposite. That didn't happen on any of these previous problems. The variable came before subtraction here. If we go back to these, the variable came before subtraction, and we didn't see these questions, but we saw problems like it before. We had, let's see if we have any other ones we can refer to. The variable came before subtraction. So in the questions that we're going to see, the variable is going to come after subtraction. Please add the opposite. So in this example 8 that's already done for you, 35 minus x is rewritten as 35 plus negative 1x equals 21. What's happening to the variable x is we're multiplying by negative 1 and adding by 35. The inverse of multiplying by negative 1 is to divide by negative 1. The inverse of adding by 35 is either to subtract by 35 or add a negative 35. I would put add negative 35 here because we used to do these problems without a calculator, so making it plus negative 35 is a little easier. But again, if you prefer subtracting by 35, that's okay too. So we start by adding negative 35 since we work in reverse order to both sides. And it's going to cancel out on the left, leaving you with, and this is important, negative 1x equals 21 plus negative 35, which is negative 14. Divide both sides then by negative 1 to get x equals 14. It's really, 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 really important that you do not try to add 35 to both sides. If you don't add the opposite, I see students who will say, oh, there's subtraction. I just have to add 35 to both sides. But you're not subtracting 35 from x, you're subtracting x from 35. There is a difference because subtraction is not commutative. So let's look at one of these, and then I have one for you to try independently. So number 9, I would definitely suggest starting by rewriting this as 9 plus negative 1y. Again, because the variable comes after subtraction. What's happening to the variable is that we're multiplying by negative 1. Well, let me just pull all this down. We're multiplying by negative 1, and then we're adding by 9. The inverse of adding by 9 is to subtract by 9. So let's do that first. We're going to subtract 9 from both sides. We get 10 equals negative 1y. The inverse of multiplying by negative 1 is to divide by negative 1. So you're going to get y equals negative 10 for your solution. Again, I would definitely suggest, like if I look at a problem like 8 or 9, I know that I'm just going to subtract 9. I'm going to have 10 equals negative y, and I'm just going to divide both sides by negative 1 to get my solution. But I have a lot more experience, and at some point I expect you'll be able to see a problem like numbers 8 or 9 and not have to show the same steps. But for right now, if your variable comes after subtraction, please add the opposite and add that coefficient of 1 in front of your variable as well. So rewrite it as 9 plus negative 1y. All right, let me give you one to try. Try this one. 8 minus t equals negative 10. Pause the video. Okay, I hope you gave this one a try because again, these problems are really important for us. The variable t comes after subtraction, so we are going to add the opposite and write it as 8 plus negative 1t equals negative 10. We're first going to get rid of that plus 8 by subtracting 8 from both sides. So that gets us negative 1t equals negative 18. Now divide both sides by negative 1. and you're going to end up getting t equals positive 18 for your solution. And you can check this, like 8 minus 18 gets us negative 10. If you subtract 8 from both sides, or if you try to add 8 to both sides, let's go with that, you end up getting negative 2 for your solution. 8 minus negative 2 doesn't give you negative 10. So it's a good idea for these kind of problems to check your solution. Okay, I do want to finish this video with two last questions. It still has the variable coming after subtraction, but there's a coefficient besides 1 in front of the variable. So number 10 is done for you. We have 14 minus 2y equals negative 18. Again, your variable comes after subtraction, so I do suggest adding the opposite. Writing it as 14 plus negative 2y equals negative 18. Now, the two things that are happening to the variable here, I'll just bring all this down, is we're multiplying by negative 2 and we're adding by 14. So our inverse operations are to divide by negative 2 and subtract by 14. So let's start by subtracting by 14 on both sides. We'll get negative 2y equals negative 32. Divide by negative 2, we've got a lot of negatives in this problem. You end up getting y equals 16. Let's go ahead and give number 11 a try. Start by adding the opposite and rewriting this thing as 12 plus negative 8r equals 60. The things that are happening to the variable are that we're multiplying by negative 8 and adding by 12. So our inverses are to divide by negative 8 and subtract by 12. So remember, we want to work in reverse order. Let's subtract 12 from both sides. It's going to cancel out on the left-hand side. You're going to be left with negative 8r equals 48, since 60 minus 12 is 48. Now divide both sides by negative 8 to get your final solution. Hopefully you recognize it should be negative 6. Again, I know we went through these pretty quickly, but we're going to be mixing in some more challenging problems besides these that involve 2 steps plus a little bit more, maybe another little half step as well. So please make sure you keep in mind a couple of things. When we identify what's happening to the variable and our inverses, we work in reverse order with our inverse operations. I also want you to remember that anytime the variable comes after subtraction, you want to make sure that you add the opposite, at least for now. There may come a point in time where you don't have to do that when you have a lot more experience with this. But for right now, do it. That way you don't miss any of your negatives or subtraction signs that just disappear and things like that. We want to make sure we have the correct solutions. Thanks for listening.